Diversity and oppression presentation. My friend, I hear what you're saying, but that's easier said than done. You have no idea what it's like to be Black or a minority living in America. Envision yourself living in a country where everyone is supposed to be free and equal, but yet discrimination, oppression, and racism impacts your life on a daily basis. If you were to consider this year alone, Blacks have experienced a widespread of racism and inequality than any other ethnic group, and it's time to put a stop to such racial injustice. Sarah, I would like for you to take a moment and imagine yourself in the position of a Black man who fears one-on-one interaction with a white officer. Better yet, take a moment and imagine that you are George Floyd and you walk into a local grocery store to make a purchase, and without realizing it, you pass a counterfeit $20 bill to the clerk, who assumed you were intentionally trying to run a scam, and he calls in law enforcement to the scene. Before you had an opportunity to understand what was going on, imagine the officer immediately trying to reprimand you, and the matter instantly escalated. Before you know it, you're on the ground struggling to breathe, crying for your deceased mother, while the officer in authority to protect and serve is now the officer who took your life away. So you see, Sarah, when you say, why can't we all get along? Pretend you're in George's shoes and you lost your life at the hands of a white officer who allowed his power and privilege to inflict excessive force for supposedly handing off counterfeit money. It's heartbreaking to think about, I know, but now visualize the same sufferings that Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, and Michael Brown experienced as they were too coldly murdered by the hands of white officers who took advantage of his white privilege. As one can see, being anything other than Caucasian is unacceptable and not allowed in today's society, and explains why power and privilege are many of the reasons why our minority groups, in terms of social, political, and economic statuses, are oppressed. Throughout history, the criminal justice system has served unjust punishment to people of color, while white people have gotten slaps on the wrist for similar crimes. For instance, the University of Southern California college admission scandal is just an example of how the justice system refuses to equally reprimand white people with money and power. Parents of students with failing grades paid up to $500,000 to administrators to allow their children to be accepted into the school without having the required GPA. One of the parents involved was famous actor Lori from Full House. As I'm sure you remember, Lori was only sentenced to 2 months in a minimum security prison of her choosing, and the prison offered amenities such as yoga, ab classes, Pilates, calligraphy, and beading. Not only that, the so-called prison offered coffee hour and brunch on the weekends. Now, let's discuss Kelly, a single mother in Ohio, who was convicted of a felony for a very similar crime. Kelly's official charges were tampering with records that allowed her children to enroll in the neighboring school district on the other side of town, in a town called Fairland, where her father also lived. Kelly simply used her father's address to give her children an opportunity to receive a better education in a high-performing school. But she was later put in jail for 10 days, plus 2 years probation. In addition, at the time, Kelly was studying to be a teacher, but because she was convicted of a felony for trying to improve the education of her children, it is possible she would not be able to obtain her teacher license. You see, Sarah, the main difference between Lori and Kelly is that Lori is rich and a white woman, and Kelly is poor and a single Black mother. Both of them committed a crime by trying to falsify documents to get their children into a better performing school, but only Lori, a white woman, was able to get a slap on the wrist, while Kelly, a Black woman, served jail time and had her career ruined before it even had an opportunity to get started. This is a perfect example of white privilege, and it shows how it's used to oppress lower class Black people. Because if Lori was Black, she would have gotten more than a slap on the wrist and a harsher punishment than Pilates, coffee, and yoga. Sarah, all I'm asking you to do is pay attention to what you say and how you say it. For in the eyes of people of color, Black people, as we're speaking about, this is why we call it white privilege, because only white people are the group of individuals who can put such extreme limitations and constraints on other individuals without having to suffer any consequences. More importantly, only such group of privileged individuals can advocate for unethical behaviors and not be penalized for unjust actions. Take the President of the United States, for instance, and his refusal to denounce white supremacy in his recent 2020 presidential election debate. Donald Trump has shown minorities this is a pattern of his, and while I know you won't find it surprising, refer to his comment back in 2016 when white supremacists marched and yelled racist chants throughout Charlottesville, and he categorized them as being very good people. This shows us that Trump will continue to condone white supremacists, and Sarah, enough is enough. And I hope you're beginning to see why Blacks and other minority groups living in America are tired of prejudiced behavior and targeted discrimination. We're merely tired of being denied fair treatment in terms of human rights and social justice. Just as our fellow LGBTQ brothers and sisters, which in my opinion describes why community development is a key purpose to building communities based on justice, equality, and mutual respect. They have a lot to do with what I'm talking about, especially in terms of inequality. While these individuals did not suffer fatal treatment, just as the Black men I mentioned a moment ago, these group of individuals have suffered in many other forms and have been stereotyped against as it relates to their sexual orientation preferences, gender equality, and overall intersectionality. One must understand that intersectionality is a framework for conceptualizing a person, group of people, or social problems as affected by a number of discriminations and disadvantages. Intersectionality takes into account the people overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complexity of the injustices they face. For instance, refer to the Christian Legal Advocacy Group when they asked the U.S. Supreme Court to rule that employers should be able to legally discriminate against transgender people in the workplace. After the owner of Harris Funeral Home fired his employee, Amy, a transgender woman, for informing him that she would be presenting as a woman at work. The LGBTQ community was appalled and began initiating demonstrations and protests to acknowledge that trans rights were also human rights. While the United States Supreme Court did not rule in favor of this, just think of how this sexist act could have brought back the destruction of civil rights for LGBTQ people in this country, especially after Ruth Ginsburg spent much of her legal career as an advocate for gender equality, women's rights, civil rights, and the rights of LGBTQ individuals. So you see, Sarah, when you say, what do they have to do with this? Pretend that you're a woman who chooses to identify as being male or female, demanding equal rights and human rights despite your sexual orientation. Because people no longer have humanity for individuals when considering the complexity of diversity, gender, and sex. Nowadays, it's hard to find someone like Ruth to support the idea of ensuring that others have the power, ability, and authority to achieve self-determination as it relates to the significance of empowerment and advocacy on one's behalf, when emphasizing the importance of speaking up for human rights with no conditions. Sarah, how can you beg to differ when there is proof right before your eyes? Let's reflect on the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance. The increased rates of poverty and economic inequality is easy to observe here. Present data show that low-income African American and individuals with a low economic status are being affected at higher rates than any other race and economic status groups. which provides great insight of why we cannot lose sight of sustainability in the context of global communities during the corona pandemic. People living in poverty are dying at rapid rates, more likely to have health complications, lack resources required to stay at home, and have directly experienced a lack of economic justice that created job losses and kept individuals out of work for months. In addition, the pandemic has uncovered vital flaws in our global system. It has brought attention to the urgent needs of global actions to meet people's needs as a globalization effort to start growing economic societies through the world to save our planet and to build an objective and resilient world. It has brought attention to why working together is important to save lives, restore livelihoods, and bringing the global economy back on track. But more importantly, in terms of economical, environmental justice, and the fair treatment of people. Truly, Sarah, as a BSW student who is responsible for ensuring ethic values are being met within the social work practice and a micro-social environment, I'm only informing you of these things so you can learn to consider an unbiased approach when making reference to all racial and ethnic groups residing in America. With an obligation to enhance human well-being, this perspective has allowed me to have a cultural competence mindset to always consider and address the cultural needs of individuals, families, groups, and communities in our area. In addition, Sarah, this is ultimately the reason why I will continue to encourage strength and resiliency during such extremely challenging times. I hope this has enlightened you, Sarah. Thank you.